Hello YouTube Pipers, Double O Pipe here, alias Rick. I'm pouring out a batch of velvet here. To put into my, if I can read this, the Everyman London Pipe. I'm not sure where I got this one, but we're going to give it a shot. I do like velvet. Well, in reference to yesterday, or was it the day before? I don't remember now. Time just, you lose time at my age. But I was going to be present for the month of August, that reading marathon for the month of August started by, Criminali, by reading the book Sin on Wheels. Well, it's what we called a dirty book back in the day, 50s to the 60s. And they don't call them dirty books anymore, they call them erotica now. And what they put into the erotica books, let's just say that Sin on Wheels was meh compared to the books of today. Shows the difference in society as to what's permitted and what isn't. Back then, our society was, by today's standards, a little uptight, but by the standards of the time, life was a little more vanilla. There was less to choose from. There was more to do other than watch your phone. And things were just a little more natural back then. Society didn't talk about, or people in society didn't talk about things the way they do today. We were above board, unless, of course, boys were together and girls were together. I doubt that girls talk like boys. They may have, I don't know. But we had two vocabularies. We had a vocabulary for home and a vocabulary for us when we were out amongst ourselves. And we talked about girls and things, but by George, we didn't know what everybody knows today. We I got my talk on the birds and the bees when I was 11. And it went like this. It was one Saturday, my dad asked me to help him rake leaves. He never did that. And he kept looking at me the whole time, kind of frowning to himself, and then he'd go back to raking. And finally, when he had to take a break, he stopped and leaned on his rake and he said, "Son?" And I looked over and said, "Yes, sir." It's that time in your life when I need to talk to you about life. I said, "What about life?" And he said, "Well, I know that you and all the boys your age know about what life is, and I know Clyde's had a lot to say to you. So I know that you're aware of what happens between a man and a woman." And I was thinking to myself, he's going to talk to me about the birds and the bees? And he said, "So, since I know you're aware of this, if you ever have a question, you come to me and ask." That was the talk. So I learned most of my birds and bees stuff from Clyde. Sex was a hush-hush thing. And that's why I say, excuse me, that this book, Sin on Wheels, was, for that particular time, some really delicate discussion or tale of what happens in a trailer park. And it was so vanilla. So vanilla. But if I had read it back then, I would have been blushing the whole time. Well, that's the difference between a history book and a novel. A history book can give you all the facts and tell you what it was like, but a novel that's been written in that particular time frame, within the time frame, gives you a feel for what that era was like, which is a good balance of factual books and story books. But after reading this and thinking about that, I remembered a time Clyde and I used to go for rides all the time, and we used to drink a lot. But there was this one time when I was in high school. I think it was the summer, though, that we were out riding. He had one of his other friends in the back seat. And I said, "Clyde, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't you think we should go home?" He said, "Neff, it's early yet. Why don't we go over to the..." Oh, dang, I can't even remember the name of the place. The patio. Boy, we used to go there every night. And I'm surprised it slipped my mind what the name of it was. Anyway, he said, "Let's go over to the patio, Neff, and get one last beer." I said, "Okay, I'm game." And he said, "What about you?" Talking to the guy in the back seat. And he said, "No, I got to get up and go to work. I'm not like you two bums." So Clyde said, "Okay," and he took him home, came back to the patio. Now the patio was a lot like that drive-in in that movie. I can't remember the name of it. But it was a Friday night, and all the kids would drive around town and go visit this place and see who was there. That's what this place was like, the patio. It had a strip with a covering where you parked, and somebody would come out and take your order and go back in and bring it out to you and put it on your window. And this place was famous for its hamburgers. If you know what a 45 record is, their hamburgers were that size. Good hamburgers. Wow. I was drunk one night and ate 3 of them. I can't believe I did it. I guess the anesthetic effect of the alcohol I didn't realize how stretched my stomach was. I don't know. But they were delicious. Place is long gone now. And Clyde, as with every place he ever went to, was good friends with the guy who ran the place. So he went to the patio, parked his car, and it was raining. So we ran up to the door where the overhang stopped the rain on us. And as I was going to open the door, he said, "Wait a minute." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Can you hear that?" I said, "I don't hear anything." He said, "Wait a minute." He started walking in the direction he heard the sound. And it was kind of in the back where the trash cans were. And it was a girl. She was sitting there in the rain amongst the trash cans with her arms around her knees and her head on her knees, and she was crying. And Clyde got down close to her and said, "Honey, are you okay?" And she just looked at him and went back crying. He said, you can't stay out here in this rain. It's cold. You'll catch your death. Why don't you come back with me to the car and we'll get you some coffee to warm you up?" She looked at him again and kind of did this number, still crying. He said, "Neff, go get some coffee for her." And so I went in and got some coffee. And he walked over to his car. And she got in the back seat and he sat back there with her. She was still crying when I got there. And he was talking to her very low, trying to get her to relax and tell him what was wrong. And she said, I just can't tell you. I just can't tell you." He said, "I know you, don't I? Don't you live in the area around where I live?" And she kind of looked at him and nodded yes. He said, "Now I remember who you are." And he said her name. He said, why don't I take you on home? You should be home in bed. You shouldn't be out here crying in the rain." She said, "I can't go home." He said, "What do you mean you can't go home?" She said, "My daddy kicked me out." Now this was a 16-year-old girl. And both Clyde and I went, "What?" He said, What you can't mean that. What caused him to do something like that? I just can't believe a father would kick his daughter out like that." She said, "Well, he did." He said, "Well, tell me what happened to make this occur." She said it was a while back, as she was crying. And she went out with this boy on a first date. And during the date, he slipped something into her drink. And in a little bit, she passed out. And the next thing she remembered, excuse me, that frog just won't go away. She said, the next thing I knew, he was driving me back home. And when he got to my house, he dropped me off, and I haven't seen him again. She said when I went inside and was fixing to go to bed, there were several articles of clothing that I was missing. And she said, I wasn't sure, but I thought something might have happened. And then, after a few weeks, she started throwing up in the mornings. So she made an appointment with the doctor and went to see him. And he announced to her that she was going to have a baby, that she was pregnant. And the word pregnant popped out of her mouth, and both Clyde and I looked at each other and then looked at her. We were kind of startled because you didn't say pregnant too much back in those days. You said in a family way or something like that. You didn't. The word pregnant wasn't used. But she said it, and we were startled, and both of us just still couldn't believe that her father had thrown her out. She said that when she found out from the doctor, she waited until the afternoon when her dad got home from work and told him what the doctor said. And he said he stood up and started yelling at her, calling her a whore, grabbed her by the elbow, took her to the door, and shoved her outside and said, you go live with whoever did that to you, and don't come back here, you little whore. And he slammed the door. He threw her out. And she was just walking around until she saw a friend who was driving somewhere, and the friend picked her up. And naturally, they went to the patio because all the kids go to the patio. And when she got there, she jumped out of the car and she went to the back of and she had been sitting there crying the whole time, even after it started raining. Well, Clyde said, well, let's leave here because they're going to be closing up and we can't sit here. And he said, I'll drive you back home. And she said, it won't do any good. He said, well, let's just go and we'll talk a little bit more. And he drove and found a place and parked where people wouldn't disturb us. And he kept talking to her, trying to ease her mind. And then he just put his arm around her, and she slumped against her head on his chest. And she fell asleep. And Clyde just sat there, holding on to her. Well, he drifted off to sleep, and I drifted off to sleep. And next thing we knew, it was dawn, and the birds were beginning to sing. And Clyde woke up and waited for her to wake up. And he said, I'm going to take you home. And she said, it won't do any good. And I said, well, let me try and talk to your dad. So she looked at him, a little bit of hope in her eyes, and said, okay. So he cranked up the car and drove over to where she lived in that area. And Clyde got out of the car and went up to the front door and knocked on the door. Her mother came to the door, and Clyde just started talking to her. Couldn't hear, he was too far away to see what he was saying, but he pointed at the car and he asked to talk to, I know he asked to talk to the father, because she went and got the father. And when he came to the door, she ran out of the door and ran to the car and opened up and held it, took her daughter out and held her close. And Clyde went inside with the father. And I don't know what he said. He was in there 5 or 10 minutes talking with him. And they opened the door, and Clyde came out, and the girl's dad came out with him. And Clyde walked to the car, and the mother was guiding her daughter back to the house and looked at Clyde, and Clyde looked at her, and she mouthed, "Thank you," to him, and he just nodded. And she walked her daughter up to the door, and the father embraced both of them at the same time. So whatever Clyde did, it was good, because he welcomed her back home. And Clyde got in the car and cranked it up and drove me home. I never forgot that. It showed what a good person Clyde was. He was a person that would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. His heart, he was a good man. And I was thankful that I grew up with him. He was he was more than an uncle to me. He was more like a brother. I was an only child. And we grew up through the formative years together. Stayed in the same room, slept in the same bed. And I'm just thankful for those days, because that meant a lot to me. And I miss him. I can't tell you how much I miss him. But he was a good person. And I know that that girl, her father accepted her back home. And I know that after a few years she met somebody, got married, and they have a nice family. So it turned out for the best for her. And Clyde contributed to that, because she felt like she could never go home gay. But that is the 50s and the early 60s. Now, I'm still a aficionado of the Garb August. And after finishing Sin on Wheels, I think I'm going to go with this next. The Naked and the Deadly by Lawrence Block. All of his stories from the 50s, 60s, the men's adventure magazines. This is edited by Robert Days and Wyatt Doyle. Now, they have several books on the market. And I'll just show you a few of them, because I've collected them over the years. This is Killer Sharks. This is I Watched Them Eat Me. These stories from those days are just wild and fun and quick to read. Just so enjoyable. And this one is Cuba, Sugar, Sex, and Slaughter. Just wild adventures. I had another one called, and I must have given it to my son. It was called, edited by the same people, Robert Days and Wyatt Doyle, called Weasels Ate My Flesh. I can't find it anywhere, so I had to have given it to my son. That was outrageously fun. Now let me show you two more covers and then I'll quit. Oh, come on. There you go. He-men, bagmen, and nymphos. by the same guys, edited by the same guys. And one more. This one I haven't checked into, so I don't know exactly what it's all about, but I'm sure it's just as good as all the rest. Cryptozoology. But anyway, I thought I'd show you all those. This one I was sorry I got the paperback because the hardback has a lot more in it, from what I understand. So maybe I'll get the hardback one day. If any of you enjoy short stories, just adventure stories, something to read to fill your mind with just adventure and I don't know what else. It's just, they're fun reads, is all I can say. And I'll probably come back and talk to you more about these books because I enjoy books. And I think I want to pass some of that on. But anyway, so much for my gabbing. Can't keep my pipe lit. I want to thank you for listening. I don't know that y'all are too appreciative of my talking about these books, but it's my channel. You can turn me off if you like, but I think I'm going to talk about things I like. I'll continue to talk about Clyde and the past and the things that we did. So, hope you weren't too bored. And I hope everything's all right with you. I hope your day is good. Hope you don't have a high tide like we did. Me. But anyway, I'll say God bless till the next time. Bye-bye.